The bullet left her rifle at 2,847 feet per second. In the 0.3 of a second it took to reach the target, Sergeant First Class Yara Okonkwo exhaled completely, her heartbeat suspended between systole and diastole. 800 meters away, through heat shimmer and crosswind, the steel plate rang like a church bell. Behind her, someone muttered words she had heard 1,000 times before. Lucky shot. Yara did not turn around. Luck was for people who had not spent 10,000 hours learning to make the impossible routine. The qualification range at FOB Wolverine sat baking under the Hellman's sun, a stretch of packed earth and steel targets that separated the shooters from the pretenders. Yara chambered another round. The wind had shifted 2 degrees east. She adjusted without conscious thought, the way her father had taught her before she was old enough to understand ballistics, back when shooting was just a game between a little girl and the man who made her believe she could do anything. She fired again. The plate sang. Master Sergeant Colt Harrigan stood 20 meters behind the firing line with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He was a wide man with sun-damaged skin and eyes that tracked Yara the way a hawk tracks movement in tall grass. When she cleared her weapon and stood, he was already talking. "Well, look at that," he announced loud enough for every shooter on the line to hear. "Seems like somebody finally figured out how to hit the broadside of a barn. Must be the targets are set wrong today." The other snipers shifted uncomfortably. A few laughed, the nervous kind that meant they knew something was wrong but lacked the courage to name it. Specialist Tomas Delgado, Yara's assigned spotter, kept his eyes fixed on the ground. Yara collected her brass without responding. She had learned years ago that men like Harrigan fed on reaction. Star them long enough, they either moved on or escalated until they exposed themselves. Either way, silence was her weapon. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Maybe you have seen someone whose talent was dismissed because of who they are rather than what they can do. The scores were posted an hour later. Yara had outshot every sniper in the section by a margin that was not even close. Her name sat at the top of the list like an accusation. Harrigan stared at the board for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the operations center without a word. Delgado appeared at Yara's shoulder as she broke down her rifle for cleaning. He was young, maybe 23, with the eager energy of someone who still believed the army was a meritocracy. "You smoked them," he said quietly. "Every single one." Yara slid the bolt free and inspected it. Does not matter what the paper says. Matters what Harrigan decides to do about it. Delgado frowned. He cannot just ignore the scores. They are official. Watch him. She was right. The mission brief that evening assigned positions for the following night's Overwatch operation. Yara's team drew the Eastern Ridge, a position so exposed and poorly angled that it was essentially a punishment. The other teams would have clear sight lines to the valley floor. Yara would be shooting through a narrow gap between rock formations that barely qualified as concealment. She said nothing during the brief. Delgado's face reddened with anger he was too junior to express. After the other teams filed out, Yara stayed behind to study the maps. The Eastern Ridge was bad, but it was not impossible. There was a secondary position 50 meters north that might work if she could reach it without being silhouetted. She began calculating angles. She noticed Delgado struggling before he noticed himself. He had been on patrol for 18 hours before the qualification shoot, running on caffeine and pride. Now his hands trembled slightly as he gathered his equipment, and his pack sat on the ground because he lacked the energy to lift it. Yara walked over and picked up his pack without breaking stride. She slung it over her own shoulder alongside her gear. Delgado started to protest. "Sergeant, I can carry my own," he began. "I know you can," Yara said, "but you do not have to. Get some sleep. Tomorrow night is going to be long." Something shifted in Delgado's expression. The skepticism that had lived there since he was assigned to a female sniper began to crack. He nodded once and headed toward the barracks. Yara carried both packs to the armory, where she found Staff Sergeant Renard Whitmore sitting alone in the dim light. They called him Ghost for two reasons. The first was his preternatural stillness. the way he could sit motionless for hours without seeming to breathe. The second was because everyone assumed he was already dead. A piece of shrapnel had taken his right eye in Kandahar 4 years ago, ending his career as one of the most feared snipers in theater. Now he managed logistics and watched the new generation with his remaining eye, seeing everything and saying almost nothing. He looked up as Yara entered. His gaze moved from her face to the 2 packs on her shoulders, and something like approval flickered across his scarred features. "The Eastern Ridge," he said. It was not a question. Yara set down the packs and began organizing her cleaning kit. "Harrigan wants me to fail." Ghost was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is something you need to know about Harrigan. Something that happened in Kandahar." Yara stopped. Ghost never talked about Kandahar. Nobody who knew him ever brought it up. Before he could continue, Harrigan's voice cut across the armory like a blade. "Okonkwo, my office. Now." Ghost's mouth closed. His eye met Yara's for just a moment, and in that brief contact she saw something she had not expected. Warning. Urgency. And underneath it all, the cold patience of a man who had been waiting years for the right moment. Yara set down her cleaning rod and walked toward whatever waited for her in Harrigan's office. Behind her, Ghost watched her go, his hand resting on an old challenge coin he kept in his pocket, a coin from a unit that no longer existed, carried by men who had died because of secrets that refused to stay buried. Harrigan's office smelled like stale coffee and cheap cigars. He sat behind a desk covered in papers he never read, his thick fingers laced together, his expression arranged into something that was supposed to look official but came across as barely contained hostility. Yara stood at attention. She did not speak first. That was his game, making subordinates fill silence with nervous words he could use against them later. Harrigan let a full minute pass before he leaned back in his chair. "You think you proved something today," he said. "Out there on that range. You think hitting some steel makes you a sniper." Yara kept her eyes fixed on the wall behind him. "The qualification scores speak for themselves, Master Sergeant." Harrigan's smile had no warmth in it. "Scores." He said the word like it tasted rotten. "You know what scores do not show? How someone performs when the pressure is real. When rounds are coming back at them. When their spotter is bleeding out and the target is moving and everything in their body is screaming at them to run. I have 4 combat deployments, Master Sergeant. I know what pressure feels like." He stood up slowly, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "For deployments, riding a desk in the Tactical Operations Center. Watching real snipers work through a screen. That is not the same thing, and you know it." It was a lie. Yara had logged confirmed kills on 3 of those deployments. Her record was accessible to anyone who cared to look. But Harrigan was not interested in facts. He was interested in control. "I'm going to be watching you," he continued. "Every shot, every call, every decision. And when you make a mistake, and you'll make a mistake, I'm going to document it. I'm going to build a case so thorough that no amount of diversity quotas or political pressure will save your career." He leaned closer. "Do you understand me?" Yara met his eyes for the first time. She held them for 3 seconds, long enough to make her point, then returned her gaze to the wall. "Will that be all, Master Sergeant?" He wanted her to react. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands curled at his sides. But she gave him nothing. After a long moment, he stepped back. Dismissed. She walked out without looking back. The barracks were quiet when she reached her quarters. Most of the section was already asleep, resting up for tomorrow's mission. Yara sat on her bunk and pulled a small box from her footlocker. Inside, wrapped in a faded bandana, was a shooting glove so worn that the leather had gone soft as cloth. Her father's glove. The one he had worn when he taught her to shoot on the abandoned farm outside Memphis, back when she was barely tall enough to shoulder a rifle. She slipped her hand inside. It still fit perfectly. It always had, even when she was 12 and her fingers did not reach the ends. Her father used to say the glove would grow with her. She had not understood what he meant until years later, after the cancer took him, after she enlisted to escape a grief that threatened to swallow her whole. The glove had not grown. She had grown into it. into everything he had prepared her to become. She closed her eyes and whispered words she had not spoken aloud in months. "I'm still here, Daddy. I am still shooting." His voice came back to her, not as memory, but as something deeper, something woven into her muscles and bones. "Eyes lie, baby girl. Trust your body." He had taught her to shoot in conditions that would have made other instructors quit. Blindfolded, in rain so heavy she could not see the target. At night, with no moon. He believed that true marksmanship lived below conscious thought, in the place where breath and heartbeat and trigger pull became one seamless action. The eyes were just confirmation of what the body already knew. She had not understood then. She understood now. A knock at her door pulled her back. Delgado stood in the hallway, his expression uncertain. "Sergeant, I wanted to thank you for earlier, with the pack." Yara tucked the glove back into its box. "You would have done the same." Delgado hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "The things Harrigan says. About you. About how you got here." He paused, struggling with words that did not want to come. "I believe some of it. When they first assigned me to you, I thought maybe he was right. That maybe you were just a quota." He met her eyes. "I was wrong. I saw you shoot today. That was not luck. That was not politics. That was the real thing." Yara studied him for a moment. He was young enough to still believe that admitting error was difficult. He would learn eventually that the difficult part was not admitting you were wrong. The difficult part was deciding what to do about it. "Tomorrow night is going to test both of us," she said. "Get some sleep." He nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "Sergeant, what did Ghost want to tell you?" Before Harrigan interrupted, Yara thought about the look in Ghost's eye, the weight of whatever secret he carried about Kandahar. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I intend to find out." The next morning she found Ghost in his usual spot, a corner of the motor pool where he could watch the entire base without being observed. He was working on a vehicle manifest, but his eye tracked her approach. "You wanted to tell me something," Yara said. "About Harrigan. About Kandahar." Ghost set down his pen. He glanced around to confirm they were alone. "2 men died on Operation Harrigan led," he said quietly. "Official reports said they were ambushed. Enemy got lucky with an RPG." He paused. "The official report is a lie. What really happened?" Harrigan panicked, called in fire support coordinates on his own position. Friendly artillery killed those men, not the enemy. Only one person witnessed it besides Harrigan, a young private who was wounded in the blast. Yara felt something cold settle in her chest. What happened to the witness? He died 2 days later. Complications from his injuries. Ghost's voice was flat. "Convenient timing. Why are you telling me this?" "Because Harrigan is not just a bully. He is a man with something to hide. And men with something to hide become dangerous when they feel threatened." He looked at her directly. "You threaten him, Sergeant. Everything you are. Everything you represent. Be careful." Before Yara could respond, the motor pool loudspeaker crackled to life. "All sniper teams report to the armory for final equipment check. Mission launch in 4 hours." Ghost picked up his manifest. "One more thing. Before you step off tonight, check your equipment. Check everything. Trust nothing that came from the armory without your hands on it first." He walked away before she could ask what he meant. But the warning stayed with her, settling into her gut like a stone. The armory was chaos organized into rows. Snipers moved between weapon racks and equipment cages, checking and rechecking the gear that would keep them alive through the night. Yara found her assigned rifle in its usual spot, serial number matching her records, everything exactly where it should be. She picked it up and something felt wrong. It was not obvious. The weight was correct. The balance was familiar. But when she shouldered the weapon and looked through the scope, the crosshairs sat slightly off from where her body expected them to be. Millimeters. Less than most shooters would notice. But Yara had been looking through scopes since before she could read. She knew this rifle the way she knew her own hands. Someone had adjusted her zero. She kept her face neutral as she carried the rifle to a workbench in the corner. Delgado followed, confusion on his face. "What is wrong?" he asked. Yara did not answer immediately. She removed the scope and examined the adjustment turrets. The witness marks she had scratched into the metal after her last zero confirmation were no longer aligned. Someone had turned the elevation dial 4 clicks and the windage dial 2 clicks. At 800 meters, that would translate to a miss of nearly a foot. At longer ranges, the error would compound. She thought about Ghost's warning. Check your equipment. Trust nothing. She recalibrated in silence, her movements precise and unhurried. When she finished, she scratched new witness marks and locked the turrets down. Delgado watched with growing unease. Sergeant, what just happened? My scope was off. How? You confirmed 0 yesterday. Yara met his eyes. How do you think? Delgado's face went pale as understanding hit him. That is insane. That is attempted murder. If you took a shot with bad 0 in a combat situation, you would miss. And if you miss, the target shoots back, which is exactly what someone is counting on. Delgado looked around the armory as if seeing it for the first time, as if every shadow might contain a threat. You need to report this, he said. Captain Linden needs to know. Yara shook her head. Report what? That my scope was off? Scopes drift. It happens. Without proof of tampering, I am just another soldier making excuses. And if I accuse Harrigan directly, it becomes my word against his. She slid the scope back onto the rifle. He is 15 years in. Connections at battalion and brigade. Friends who owe him favors. I have a qualification score that made him look bad. Who do you think they believe? Delgado's hands curled into fists. This is not right. No, it is not. But right is not when fights. Preparation wins fights. She stood and handed him a spotting scope. Now, check your equipment. Every piece. Assume nothing is safe. They spent the next 2 hours going through every item in their loadout. Yara found nothing else tampered with, but the paranoia had taken root. She checked her night vision goggles 3 times, running them through full power cycles, testing the battery indicators, examining the housing for signs of interference. Everything appeared functional. Appeared. That word sat in her mind like a splinter. The afternoon heat began to fade as mission time approached. Yara used the remaining hours to drill Delgado on her father's methods. They sat in a corner of the empty chow hall while she explained techniques that existed in no official manual. Close your eyes, she told him. He obeyed. Now tell me where I am. She moved silently across the room, her footsteps barely disturbing the air. Delgado's head tracked her movement. Not perfectly, but close enough to matter. How did you know? She asked. I could hear you breathing. Barely. And the air moved differently when you passed the vent. Yara allowed herself a small smile. Good. Now imagine you cannot see your target. No scope, no night vision, nothing but darkness. How do you take the shot? Delgado opened his eyes. You cannot. It is impossible. My father would disagree. She sat across from him. The eyes are just one input. The body has others. Sound, temperature, differential. Air pressure changes from movement. The feel of wind shifting when something blocks its path. A good shooter uses their eyes. A great shooter can work without them. Has anyone ever actually done that? Made a shot blind? Yara thought about a night in Memphis when she was 16. Her father had blindfolded her, positioned her in a field, and released a target drone that made almost no sound. She had tracked it by the way it displaced the air, by the faint hum of its motor, by something deeper that she could never quite name. She had fired once and brought it down at 200 meters. Her father had removed the blindfold and looked at her with tears in his eyes. You are ready, he had said. For whatever comes, you are ready. It has been done, Yara told Delgado. But hopefully we will not need to prove it tonight. The sun touched the horizon as the sniper teams gathered for final brief. Harrigan stood at the front of the room, his voice carrying the false professionalism of a man performing for an audience. Intel confirms the HVT will be moving through the Sanjin Valley between 0200 and 0400. All teams will be in position by 2300. Rules of engagement are clear. Positive identification required before any shot. He glanced at Yara. No mistakes. She held his gaze without blinking. The teams dispersed to their vehicles. Yara and Delgado loaded into the back of a transport that would take them to the foot of the eastern ridge. The worst position, the punishment detail, the place where Harrigan expected her to fail. Yara checked her night vision goggles one final time. The display glowed green. Battery indicator showed full charge. Everything nominal. She strapped them to her helmet and settled in for the ride. The transport rumbled through the gate and into the darkness beyond the wire. Ahead, the mountains of Helmand rose like black teeth against a sky full of stars. Somewhere in those mountains, a high-value target was preparing to move. Somewhere in those mountains, Yara would either prove everything she had worked for or become exactly what Harrigan wanted her to be. A failure. A quota. A woman who did not belong. She touched the pocket where her father's glove rested against her chest. Not tonight, she whispered. Not ever. Beside her, Delgado performed his own equipment check. His hands trembled slightly, nerves finally catching up with reality. In a few hours, they would be alone on a ridge with enemies in the valley below. In a few hours, everything they had trained for would be tested. Yara leaned close. Breathe, she said, slow and steady. Fear sharpens you if you let it. Trust your training. Trust me. Delgado nodded, his breathing gradually steadying. The transport drove on into the night, carrying them toward a mission that would demand more than either of them knew they had. The transport stopped at the base of the eastern ridge just after 2100. Yara and Delgado unloaded in silence, their movements practiced and economical. The driver gave them a nod and pulled away, taillights disappearing into the darkness like dying embers. The climb took 90 minutes. The ridge was steeper than the map suggested, loose shale shifting under their boots with every step. Yara led, finding the stable ground by instinct, her body remembering 1,000 night movements across terrain that wanted to betray her. Delgado followed in her footsteps, trusting her path. They reached the designated position at 2247. It was worse than she expected. The hide site was a shallow depression between two rock formations, barely deep enough to conceal a prone shooter. The gap Harrigan had identified as their firing lane was perhaps 2 feet wide, a narrow slice of visibility that would require perfect positioning to use effectively. Any movement to adjust would risk exposure. Any error in setup would mean no shot at all. Delgado surveyed the position with dismay. This is impossible, he whispered. We cannot work from here. Yara was already moving. 50 meters north, she had spotted something on the maps during her preparation. A secondary formation that might offer better angles. She low-crawled across the exposed ground, feeling the rocks dig into her elbows and knees, until she reached a cluster of boulders that created a natural shooting platform. The view opened up before her. The valley floor spread out in shades of gray and green through her night vision. The road where the HVT would travel clearly visible. It was not perfect, but it was workable. She signaled Delgado forward. He joined her, relief evident even in the darkness. How did you know this was here? He asked. I studied the terrain. Yara began, setting up her rifle. Harrigan gave us a bad position. He did not give us the only position. They established their hide site with methodical precision. Yara positioned her rifle on its bipod, confirming her scope 0 against a distant rock formation she had identified during the climb. Delgado set up beside her with a spotting scope and rangefinder, ready to feed her the data she would need. The radio crackled softly in her earpiece. All teams report status. One by one, the other sniper teams checked in from their positions around the valley. Alpha team, set. Bravo team, set. Charlie team, set. Delta team, set. Yara reported. She did not mention the position change. Harrigan would find out eventually, but by then it would not matter. The waiting began. Combat waiting was its own particular torture. The body held rigid, muscles locked against the cold ground, eyes straining through optics for movement that might not come for hours. The mind wandered if you let it, drifting toward memories and fears and the 1,000 small doubts that could destroy focus at the critical moment. Yara had learned to manage the waiting years ago. She let her thoughts settle into a calm rhythm, her breathing slow and steady, her attention floating just above full alertness, ready to snap into focus instantly, but not burning energy on sustained vigilance. Delgado was not there yet. She could hear his breathing slightly too fast, could sense the tension in his body beside her. He was fighting the waiting instead of flowing with it. "Tell me about Miami," she said quietly. The question surprised him. "What? Miami? Where you grew up? Tell me about it." He was silent for a moment, uncertain if this was some kind of test. Then he began to talk, his voice barely above a whisper. He told her about his grandmother's apartment in Little Havana, about the smell of Cuban coffee at 5 in the morning, about fishing with his cousins off the Rickenbacker Causeway. His breathing slowed as he spoke. His body relaxed into the ground. "That is why I joined," he said eventually. "My grandmother came here with nothing. Worked 2 jobs until she was 70 years old, so her grandchildren could have choices. I wanted to earn what she gave us. Wanted to serve the country that gave her a chance." Yara understood. Her own reasons were different, but equally personal. Grief and purpose and the need to become something larger than the pain that threatened to consume her. She was about to respond when her night vision flickered. The green display stuttered, recovered, then stuttered again. Yara felt ice form in her stomach. She checked the battery indicator. It showed 60%, well within operational range. But the image continued to degrade, horizontal lines rolling across her field of view like static on an old television. "Sergeant," Delgado whispered, "my NVGs are fine. Is something wrong with yours?" Yara pulled off the goggles and examined them. Nothing visible. No damage. No obvious dumping. But something was wrong with the internal electronics. Something that should not be happening with a properly maintained unit. She thought about the armory, about her rifle scope with its shifted zero, about ghost warning. Check your equipment. Trust nothing. She had checked. She had run full power cycles. She had tested everything. But there were ways to sabotage electronics that would not show up until the unit was under sustained use. Ways to damage components that would degrade over time rather than fail immediately. The battery indicator dropped to 55%, then 50, far faster than normal drain. "What is happening?" Delgado asked. His voice carried the first edge of panic. Yara ran calculations in her head. Even with accelerated drain, she should have several hours of operation remaining. The target window was 0200 to 0400. That gave her time, but not much. "Keep watching," she said. "Call out anything you see. We stay mission-focused." The minutes crawled past. Yara's night vision continued to degrade, the image growing grainier, the contrast washing out. She compensated by relying more heavily on Delgado's observations, building a mental picture from his whispered reports. At 0142, the radio crackled. "All teams be advised. Intel update. HVD convoy is running ahead of schedule. Expected arrival in target zone approximately 0230. Additional security vehicles confirmed. 12 to 15 armed personnel escorting primary target." The stakes had just doubled. More guards meant more guns. More guns meant more chances for return fire, if anything went wrong. Yara checked her night vision. The battery indicator read 32% and dropping. At 0247, the goggles flickered violently. The display scrambled into meaningless patterns before stabilizing into a washed-out haze that rendered the valley floor nearly invisible. At 0255, the image began to strobe. Light and dark, green and black. Useless. At 0300 exactly, 13 minutes before the battery should have failed, Yara's night vision died completely. She pulled off the goggles and stared into absolute darkness. No moon. No starlight reaching through the clouds that had rolled in over the past hour. Nothing but black. In her earpiece, Harrigan's voice crackled with barely concealed satisfaction. "All teams report status." Yara's finger hovered over her radio. She had a choice. Admit equipment failure and abort. Call for extraction. Let Harrigan win. Or lie. She keyed her mic. "Delta team. Equipment nominal. Ready to engage." Beside her, Delgado's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the darkness. Delgado grabbed her arm in the darkness. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "We cannot engage. You cannot see anything." Yara pulled her arm free gently, but firmly. "Keep your voice down. Sound carries. This is insane." We need to abort. Call for extraction. There is no shame in equipment failure. There is if the equipment was sabotaged. Yara settled behind her rifle, her hands finding the familiar contours without sight. If I abort now, Harrigan wins. He writes it up as my failure. Equipment failure under combat conditions. Operator error. Whatever story he wants to tell. My career ends, and his secret stays buried. Your career does not matter if you're dead. Yara allowed herself a grim smile that Delgado could not see. I'm not planning on dying tonight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's glove. The worn leather slipped over her shooting hand like a second skin. In the absolute darkness, she could feel him with her. His patience, his certainty, his voice echoing across 20 years of memory. Eyes lie, baby girl. Trust your body. Talk to me, she told Delgado. Tell me everything you can see. You're my eyes now. Delgado hesitated. Then training overcame fear, and he pressed his face to his spotting scope. The clouds had thinned slightly, allowing fragments of starlight to reach the valley floor. Not enough for Yar's naked eyes to use, but enough for a quality optic to gather. I can see the road, he said. Maybe 60% visibility. Shadows and shapes mostly. Movement will be easier to track than static details. Good. What about terrain features? Reference points I can use? There's a large boulder on the left side of the road, approximately 600 meters out. A burned vehicle on the right side at around 750. The road curves slightly at 800 meters before straightening toward the pass. Yara built the picture in her mind. She had studied aerial photographs of this valley for hours before the mission. Now she overlaid those images with Delgado's observations, constructing a three-dimensional map in her memory. Wind, she said. Delgado checked his instruments. For miles per hour from the east. Steady. Temperature differential? Cooling. Maybe 2 degrees in the last hour. Air is getting denser. Yara made the mental adjustments. Denser air meant slightly less bullet drop. Eastern wind at 4 miles per hour meant a correction of perhaps half a minute of angle at 800 meters. These were calculations she had performed 10,000 times. Her hands knew them, even if her eyes were useless. The radio crackled. All teams, convoy approaching target zone. 3 vehicles. Lead vehicle is technical with mounted weapon. Second vehicle is primary target transport. Trail vehicle is security detail. ETA to engagement zone approximately 15 minutes. Yara steadied her breathing. 15 minutes to prepare for a shot she would have to take blind. Sergeant, Delgado whispered. I need to ask you something. Ask. Why did you not report Harrigan? After Kandahar, Ghost told you what he did. Why not go to Captain Linden? Why not go to battalion? Yara considered the question. In the darkness, honesty came easier. Because I do not have proof. Ghost has suspicions. He has pieces of story. But the official record says those men died from enemy fire. The only witness is dead. Harrigan has had years to cover his tracks. She paused. And because the Army is not built to believe women who accuse senior NCOs of crimes. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Delgado was quiet for a moment. What happened? Different deployment. Different man. She did not elaborate. The details did not matter. The lesson did. I reported what I saw. I followed the process. I trusted the system. And the system chose him. He got a slap on the wrist. I got a reputation as a troublemaker. It took me 3 years to recover my career. That is not right. No, it is not. But it is real. And I learned that the only way to beat men like that is to be so good they cannot ignore you. So good that my record speaks louder than their lies. So good that when I finally have proof, no one can dismiss me. The radio interrupted again. All teams, convoy entering target zone. Prepare to engage on command. Delgado's breathing quickened. Yara reached out in the darkness and found his shoulder. I need you steady, she said. Whatever happens next, I need you with me. Can you do that? He took a long breath. Let out slowly. Yes, Sergeant. Then talk me on a target. Just like we practiced. The sound of engines reached them first. Distant, growing louder, echoing off the valley walls. Yara could not see the headlights that Delgado described, could not track the shapes moving through the darkness below. But she could hear them. She could feel the vibration through the ground. Lead vehicle passing the boulder, Delgado reported. Speed approximately 30 kilometers per hour. Gap to second vehicle is about 50 meters. Yara adjusted her rifle fractionally, her body orienting toward the sound. Second vehicle approaching the burned wreck. Target vehicle. I can see movement in the back seat. Cannot confirm identity at this distance. All teams, command crackled. Hold for positive identification. Say again, hold for PID. The convoy continued moving. Yara tracked the engine sounds, her mind calculating distance and speed. If the target stopped at any point in the engagement zone, she would have perhaps 3 seconds to take a shot she could not see. Convoy slowing, Delgado said. Lead vehicle stopping. Approximately 700 meters. Target vehicle stopping behind it. Something is happening. They're getting out. Yara's finger moved to the trigger guard. Not yet. Not until PID. I see someone exiting the target vehicle. Tall. Dark clothing. He matches the build from the intel photos. He is speaking to someone from the lead vehicle. The radio crackled. All teams, we have positive identification. Primary target is confirmed. Engage. 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 Delgado's voice sharpened. Target is moving toward the front of the convoy. 710 meters. Wind still 4 from the east. He is stopping. He is standing still. Yara exhaled completely. Her heartbeat slowed. The darkness ceased to matter. In this moment, there was only her body and the rifle and the target she could not see but somehow knew. She fired. The recoil pushed against her shoulder. The sound cracked across the valley. And in the silence that followed, Delgado's voice reached her with 2 words that changed everything. You missed. The valley erupted into chaos. Muzzle flashes strobed across the darkness as the convoy security opened fire in every direction. Yara could hear the distinct crack of rounds passing overhead, the shooters below spraying the ridgelines without knowing where the shot had come from. Talk to me, she commanded. Delgado's voice was tight but controlled. Target is moving, running toward the second vehicle. Bodyguard is down. You hit the bodyguard. 7 o'clock from the primary target. She had missed the HVT by perhaps 2 feet. In daylight, with functioning equipment, it would have been an unforgivable error. In complete darkness, shooting by sound alone, it was a miracle she had hit anything at all. But miracles did not complete missions. Other sniper teams began engaging. Yara heard the distinctive reports of their rifles from positions around the valley. The Technical's mounted gun opened up in response, heavy rounds tearing into the hillside somewhere to her left. Alpha Team's position. Alpha Team taking fire, the radio confirmed. Suppressed. Cannot engage. The mounted gun swung toward another position. More heavy fire. More teams forced into cover. Delgado kept his eye pressed to the scope. Target is in the vehicle. Second vehicle. It is moving. Reversing. They are trying to extract. Yara tracked the sound of the engine. Reversing meant moving away from her, the angle changing by the second. She calculated the lead required for a moving vehicle at approximately 700 meters, adjusting for the increasing distance. Speed, she demanded. 20 kilometers per hour. Maybe 25. Accelerating. Direction of movement? Straight back along the road. No lateral, deviación. Yara shifted her aim point. The math unfolded in her mind automatically. A vehicle moving directly away required almost no lateral lead, but introduced uncertainty about exact position within the vehicle. The HVT could be anywhere in the back seat. She needed the vehicle to stop or turn. The radio crackled with Ghost's voice from the operations center. Delta Team, be advised. Redirect drone asset to your sector. Attempting to establish visual feed. Yara felt a spark of hope. If Ghost could get her eyes through the drone, she might still salvage this. But the vehicle was not waiting for drone coverage. Vehicle approaching the curve, Delgado reported. 800 meters. Still accelerating. If it makes the curve, we lose angle. Yara made a decision. She could not hit a target. She could not see inside a moving vehicle at increasing range in total darkness. But she could stop the vehicle itself. She adjusted her aim to where she estimated the engine block would be. A disabled vehicle was better than a missed target. She fired. The round punched through the darkness. A half-second later, Delgado's voice rose with excitement. Hit. You hit the engine. Vehicle is slowing. Smoke coming from the hood. It is stopping. Then everything changed again. The mounted gun on the technical swung toward their position. Someone had spotted her muzzle flash. The heavy rounds began chewing into the rocks around them, spraying stone fragments that stung Yara's face and hands. She pressed herself flat against the ground. Delgado did the same, his spotting scope momentarily forgotten as survival became the priority. Delta Team is compromised, Harrigan's voice announced over the radio. There was something in his tone, not concern, satisfaction. All teams, Delta is combat ineffective. Shift fire to cover their extraction. Yara Keeter Mike. Negative. Delta Team is still in the fight. Require suppression on the technical. Silence on the radio. The mounted gun continued firing. Captain Linden's voice cut through. All teams, suppress that technical. Delta Team, maintain position and re-engage when able. The other sniper teams shifted fire. The technical's gunner ducked as rounds sparked off his weapon mount. The suppressive fire was not enough to kill him, but it was enough to disrupt his aim. Yara rose to a crouch. Delgado, where's the target? Delgado found his scope. Target and one bodyguard have exited the disabled vehicle. They are moving on foot toward the lead technical. If they reach it, they are gone. Range? 820 meters. Moving fast. They know we are here. Yara tracked the sound of running footsteps, boots on gravel, labored breathing barely audible over the gunfire. She could not see them. She could not use Delgado's observations fast enough to aim precisely. She needed something else. Ghost's voice returned. Delta Team, drone feed is live. Patching audio to your channel. A new voice entered her earpiece. Calm. Professional. Ghost, narrating what he saw through the drone's thermal camera. 2 targets moving northeast along the road. Primary target is rear figure. Range to your position, 830 meters. Speed approximately 10 kilometers per hour. They're approaching the boulder you designated earlier. Yara remembered the boulder. The one Delgado had described hours ago, before the darkness fell. 600 meters from their original position. She had moved 50 meters north since then. That put the boulder at approximately 650 meters on her current angle. When they passed the boulder, she said, "Call it." She tracked their movement by sound, the footsteps growing slightly louder as they approached the reference point, the direction shifting as they moved along the road. Ghost's voice dropped to a whisper. Approaching boulder. 5 meters. 3, 2. Passing now. Primary target is 1 meter behind the lead bodyguard. Yara had already begun exhaling. Her finger had already begun pressing. The rifle fired as if of its own accord. The sound of the shot merged with Ghost's next words. Hit. Primary target is down. Yara chambered another round. Bodyguard, she said. Still moving, Ghost reported. He has stopped. He is turning. He is raising his weapon toward your position. Yara fired again. Sound alone this time. No reference point. Just the knowledge of where a man would stand when turning to face an enemy. Hit, Ghost confirmed. Both targets down. Primary target is confirmed deceased. Delgado let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. You did it. In complete darkness. You actually did it. But Yara was not celebrating. Her ears had caught something else. Movement closer than the road. Footsteps on loose shale. Multiple sets. The mounted gun had gone silent because its crew had abandoned it. They were coming for her position on foot. She touched Delgado's arm. We have company. Coming up the ridge. How many? She listened. Counted footsteps. Estimated spacing. At least 8. The footsteps grew louder. Yara could hear the crunch of gravel, the scrape of boots against rock, the occasional low voice exchanging commands in Pashto. They were spreading out as they climbed, trying to flank her position from multiple angles. She pulled Delgado close and spoke directly into his ear. We need to move. Alternate position. 30 meters west. There is a depression behind the rock outcropping. I cannot see it, he whispered back. I can feel it. Trust me. They crawled in silence, Yara leading with her hands, finding the path through darkness that should have been impossible to navigate. Her father had trained her for this too. Night movements through the woods behind their Memphis home, blindfolded, learning to read the ground through her fingertips and knees. The depression was exactly where her mental map said it would be. They slid into it just as the first enemy fighter crested the ridge at their former position. She heard his confusion, the muttered Pashto as he found their abandoned hide site, then his voice rising to call the others. Delgado's breathing was too fast. Yara found his hand and squeezed once. Steady. Ghost's voice crackled in her earpiece, barely audible at the volume she had set to avoid detection. Delta Team, I have you on thermal. 8 hostiles on the ridge. 2 at your former position. 6 spreading in search pattern. Nearest hostile is approximately 15 meters northeast of your current location. Yara raised her rifle slowly. 15 meters was close enough to hear her movement if she was careless. She controlled every muscle, every breath, making herself part of the darkness. Hostile is moving west, Ghost continued. 12 meters. 10. She could hear him now. His footsteps, his breathing, the rustle of his clothing as he swept his weapon back and forth. 8 meters. He's going to pass directly in front of you. Yara waited. The footsteps came closer. She could smell him now. Sweat and tobacco and gun oil. He was close enough to touch. He passed within arm's reach. His boot kicked a stone that rolled against her leg. He paused. Yara held her breath. After an eternity measured in heartbeats, he moved on. Hostile has passed, Ghost reported. Moving away. But you have another problem. 2 hostiles converging on your position from the south. They will reach you in approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Yara calculated her options. She could not stay hidden forever. Eventually one of them would stumble onto her position. She needed to change the equation. She leaned close to Delgado. When I fire, you run. Straight down the western slope. Do not stop until you reach the extraction point. I'm not leaving you. That is not a request. Sergeant. His voice cracked. Yara, you cannot take 8 of them alone. It was the first time he had used her given name. In that single word, she heard everything. His fear, his loyalty, his refusal to abandon the woman who had carried his pack when he was too tired to carry it himself. She thought about her father, about the day he told her he was dying, about how she had wanted to stay with him, to fight the cancer alongside him, to refuse the deployment orders that would take her away. He had looked at her with those steady eyes and said the words that still echoed in her memory. You do not fight the battles you cannot win, baby girl. You survive them. You come back. And you win the ones that matter. She could not win this battle, but she could make sure Delgado survived to tell the truth about what happened here tonight. Listen to me, she said. Harrigan sabotaged my equipment. Ghost has proof. The drone footage shows everything. My shots in the dark. The equipment failure. All of it. That evidence means nothing if no one is alive to present it. Do you understand? Delgado was silent. I need you to survive, she continued. I need you to tell them what happened. Not for me. For the men Harrigan killed in Kandahar. For the next soldier he decides to destroy. She squeezed his hand one more time. When I fire, you run. Before he could respond, Ghost's voice cut in. Delta Team, I am redirecting assets. Corporal Vang is retasking close air support to your sector. ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight. But it was something. I can hold for 8 minutes, Yara said. Negative, Ghost replied. You cannot see them. You are outnumbered 8-1. The math does not work. Then help me change the math. A pause. Then Ghost's voice returned with something new in it. Something that almost sounded like pride. Understood. Hostile 1 is at your 2 o'clock, 18 meters. Hostile 2 is at your 10 o'clock, 22 meters. Hostile 3 is approaching from your 6, 15 meters, and closing. Yara processed the positions. She could not engage all 3 simultaneously, but she could create chaos. She pulled a rock from the ground beside her. Baseball-sized. Heavy. She threw it hard to her left. It clattered against the stone, outcropping 30 feet away. The hostile at her 6 o'clock spun toward the sound. His boots scraped against gravel as he moved to investigate. Now, Ghost said, "Hostile at your 2 o'clock is stationary." Looking toward the sound, Yara fired. The muzzle flash lit the darkness for a split second, long enough to see the outline of a man crumpling. Delgado ran. She heard his footsteps pounding down the western slope, heard the shouts of the remaining fighters as they spotted his movement, heard the crack of their rifles as they fired at his retreating form. She fired again and again, each shot aimed at sound and muzzle flash and Ghost's whispered coordinates. Each shot buying Delgado another second. Return fire tore through her position. Something hot sliced across her left arm. She ignored it. "Hostile down," Ghost reported. 6 remaining. "They are converging on you. 4 from the north, 2 from the east." 30 seconds until contact. Yara dropped her empty magazine and slammed home her last full one. 15 rounds. 6 targets. In complete darkness. Her father's voice came to her one more time. "Eyes lie, baby girl." She smiled in the darkness. "Then let them lie." The first hostile came over the rocks directly in front of her. She shot him before he knew she was there. The body fell across her legs. She shoved it aside and rolled left as gunfire shredded the space she had just occupied. Stone fragments peppered her face. Blood ran warm down her arm where the earlier round had grazed her. 5 remaining, Ghost reported. 2 closing from the north. 3 holding position to the east. They're being cautious now. They had seen their comrade die. They knew she was dangerous, even blind. Caution might keep them alive, but it also gave her time. Yara pressed herself into a crevice between 2 boulders. The space was barely wide enough for her body, but it provided cover from 3 directions. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate, forcing her body into the calm stillness her father had drilled into her since childhood. The wound on her arm throbbed. She ignored it. Pain was information, nothing more. It told her she was still alive. Ghost's voice returned. "Northern hostiles are splitting up. 1 moving to flank your west side. 1 holding position. Eastern group is advancing slowly. 20 meters out." Yara listened. She could hear them now. The careful footsteps. The whispered commands. They were coordinating, trying to create a crossfire that would leave her no escape. She had 11 rounds remaining. 5 targets. In daylight, those odds would be comfortable. In total darkness against enemies who knew her position, they were nearly impossible. Nearly. She thought about Delgado. Had he made it down the slope? Was he running toward the extraction point or lying wounded in the darkness? She pushed the thought away. She could not help him now. She could only give him time. "Western hostile is approaching your position," Ghost said. 15 meters. He is moving slowly, checking behind every rock. Yara shifted her rifle toward the sound. Her body mapped the space around her from memory. The boulder to her left, the depression to her right, the narrow gap ahead where an enemy would have to pass to reach her. 10 meters. He has stopped. He is listening. She held her breath. In the silence, she could hear his breathing. Rapid. Frightened. He knew he was hunting something dangerous. He is moving again. 5 meters. Yara waited. The footsteps came closer. She heard the scrape of his weapon against rock as he squeezed through a narrow passage. He is directly in front of you. 3 meters. She could see nothing, but she could hear everything. The rustle of fabric, the creak of a leather strap, the soft exhale of a man trying to control his fear. She fired once. The muzzle flash illuminated a face frozen in surprise. Then darkness returned and the body hit the ground. "Hostile down," Ghost confirmed. 4 remaining. The others opened fire immediately, aiming at her muzzle flash. Yara was already moving, rolling out of the crevice and crawling along the base of the boulder. Rounds cracked against stone inches from her head. She found another position, a shallow hole barely deep enough to provide cover. She pressed herself into it and waited for the firing to stop. "Eastern group is advancing," Ghost reported. 15 meters. They're spreading out, trying to triangulate your position. The northern hostile who had been holding position began moving as well. Yara tracked the sound of 4 separate sets of footsteps, each approaching from a different angle. "Close air support is 3 minutes out," Ghost said. "Can you hold?" 3 minutes. An eternity. I will hold, she said. She counted her remaining rounds. 10. 4 targets. She needed to be efficient. The first opportunity came from her right. A hostile moving too quickly, his footsteps loud against the gravel. She tracked the sound, calculated the distance, and fired twice. One round found his target. The man screamed and fell. The second round missed, sparking off stone somewhere in the darkness. Hostile wounded, Ghost reported. He is down, but alive. 3 combat effective remaining. The wounded man was still screaming. The sound filled the night, drowning out the footsteps of his comrades. Yara could no longer track their movement by ear. She needed to move. Staying in one position meant death. She crawled backward, away from the wounded man's cries, searching for new cover. Her hand found empty air where she expected solid ground. A drop-off. She remembered it from her mental map. A 6-foot ledge that would provide excellent concealment if she could reach the bottom without making noise. She lowered herself over the edge, hanging by her fingertips for a moment before dropping. She landed softly, her legs absorbing the impact, and immediately pressed herself against the rock wall. The screaming stopped. Someone had silenced the wounded man. Either mercy or tactical necessity. Ghost's voice was urgent now. They know you moved. All 3 are converging on your last position. When they do not find you, they will spread out again. Yara checked her rifle. 8 rounds. Where's Delgado? She asked. Pause. Then Ghost answered. He made it to the extraction point. He is safe. Something loosened in her chest. The mission was complete. The target was dead. Delgado was alive. The evidence would survive. Now, she just had to survive long enough for extraction. 2 hostiles are moving toward the ledge, Ghost warned. They heard you drop. 20 meters and closing. Yara raised her rifle toward the sounds above her. The ledge created a natural funnel. If they tried to follow her down, they would be silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky for just a moment. First hostile is at the ledge. He is looking down. She could not see him, but she could hear his breathing, could sense his presence above her like a weight in the darkness. He is climbing down. Yara waited. She heard his boots scrape against rock, heard his weapon clatter against the stone wall, heard the moment his feet left the ledge and he hung suspended. She fired 3 times at the center of the sounds. The body crashed to the ground beside her. Hostile down, Ghost said. 2 remaining. But they're pulling back. They heard the helicopters. Yara heard them too. The distant thump of rotors. Close air support finally arriving. The remaining hostiles were running. She could hear their footsteps retreating down the ridge, abandoning the fight they could no longer win. She let them go. 5 rounds remaining. She was wounded, exhausted, and blind. Pursuing would be suicide. Instead, she leaned against the rock wall and let herself breathe. Above her, the helicopters circled. Searchlights cut through the darkness she could not see. Delta Team, Ghost's voice was softer now. Extraction inbound. Hold your position. Yara closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, there was no difference from the darkness around her. I'm not going anywhere, she said. She touched the glove on her hand. Her father's glove. The leather was warm from her skin, shaped to her fingers after years of use. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. The helicopters grew louder. Rescue was coming. But somewhere in the operations center, she knew Harrigan was watching. And the reckoning was just beginning. The helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and noise. Yara felt hands pulling her aboard, felt the deck shudder beneath her as the aircraft lifted off. Someone was shouting questions at her, but she could not hear them over the rotor wash. A medic found the wound on her arm and began working on it. The pain was distant, muted by adrenaline and exhaustion. She let him work while she stared into the darkness she still could not see. The flight back to FOB Wolverine took 12 minutes. By the time they landed, the first hints of dawn were beginning to gray the eastern horizon. Yara's eyes, deprived of light for hours, gradually began to register shapes again. Shadows and silhouettes at first, then colors, then faces. The first face she saw clearly was Delgado's. He was waiting on a landing pad, his shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages, his expression caught between relief and disbelief. When she stepped off the helicopter, he moved toward her, as if to embrace her, then caught himself and snapped to attention. "Sergeant," he said. His voice cracked. "I thought you were dead. Takes more than that to kill me." She allowed herself a small smile. "How is the shoulder?" "Through and through. Missed everything important." He paused. "They're saying you killed 6 of them. In the dark. Alone. 5 confirmed. 1 wounded who did not survive. And I was not alone." She touched her earpiece. "Ghost talked me through everyone." "Speaking of Ghost," Delgado said, "he wants to see you. Immediately. He said to tell you the evidence is ready." Yara felt something shift in her chest. Evidence. The word carried weight now that the shooting was done. Evidence meant consequences. Consequences meant Harrigan. She found Ghost in the operations center, hunched over a bank of monitors with Captain Linden and Corporal Vang. They looked up as she entered. Linden's face was unreadable. Vang looked like he had not slept in days. Ghost simply nodded once, as if her survival had never been in question. "Close the door," Linden said. Yara obeyed. The room felt smaller with the door shut, the weight of what was about to happen pressing against the walls. Ghost spoke first. "The drone footage captured everything. Every shot you made after night vision failed. I have already downloaded copies to 3 separate secure locations." He turned a monitor toward her. "But that is not the most important part." The screen showed a waveform. "Audio." Ghost pressed a button and Harrigan's voice filled the room. "The Nigerian woman is becoming a problem." The words were muffled, clearly recorded from a distance or through a wall. "She keeps scoring too high. People are starting to ask questions. If she performs well on this mission, I will not be able to contain it." Another voice responded, a voice Yara did not recognize. "Then make sure she does not perform well." Harrigan again. "I switch her batteries. The night vision will fail around 0300. By then the operation will be at its peak. She will miss her shots. I will document the failure. Career over." Yara listened to her own attempted murder being discussed like a logistics problem. Her hands trembled slightly. She forced him still. "There is more," Ghost said. He switched to another recording. This one was clearer. Harrigan on a satellite phone, speaking in low tones. "Convoy route is confirmed. Sanjin Valley. 3 vehicles. Between 0200 and 0400. Your people should be able to intercept before we engage." He was selling operational intelligence. Yara understood now why the enemy had known to target her position so precisely. Why the fighters had converged on her hide site as if they had been given coordinates. Because they had been given coordinates. Harrigan was not just sabotaging her. He was working with the enemy, selling patrol routes, getting soldiers killed for money. Ghost spoke quietly. "The 2 men who died in Kandahar. They died because Harrigan sold their position to the Taliban. He made it look like friendly fire to cover his tracks. The witness who died from complications 2 days later, his 4 line was tampered with. I could never prove it until now." Linden's jaw was tight. She looked at Yara with something that might have been respect or might have been fury. "You completed the mission," the captain said, "in conditions that should have made it impossible, with equipment that was deliberately sabotaged, while the man who was supposed to lead your section was actively trying to get you killed." "I had help," Yara said. "Ghost. Vang. Delgado." "You had nothing," Linden replied. "No night vision. No support. No margin for error. And you still put rounds on target that the best shooters in theater would have missed in broad daylight." She paused. "I have already contacted Battalion. Criminal Investigation Command is en route. Harrigan will be arrested within the hour." Yara absorbed this. The words felt strange. After months of being dismissed and undermined and targeted, the idea that justice might actually arrive seemed almost foreign. "What about the recordings?" she asked. "How did Ghost get them?" Ghost exchanged a glance with Linden. The captain nodded. "I have been building a case for 3 years," Ghost said. "Since Kandahar. I knew Harrigan was dirty. I just could not prove it. So I started collecting, listening, watching." He gestured at the equipment around him. "Logistics gives you access to a lot of rooms people forget are monitored." "That is not exactly regulation," Yara said. "No," Linden agreed. "It is not. And when this is over, There will be questions about how the evidence was obtained. But right now, I have a traitor in my command who has been selling American lives to the enemy. Regulation can wait. The door opened behind them. Two military police officers entered, followed by a Colonel Yara did not recognize. Criminal Investigation Command. They had arrived faster than expected. The colonel looked at the monitors, at the frozen waveforms, at the faces of the people who had uncovered a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone had imagined. "Where is Master Sergeant Harrigan?" he asked. Ghost checked his watch. Morning formation. He will be in front of the entire battalion in approximately 4 minutes. The colonel smiled grimly. Perfect timing. They walked out together into the gray dawn light. Ahead, Yara could see the battalion assembling for morning formation. Hundreds of soldiers standing in neat rows. And at the front, Harrigan, preparing to address them as if this were any other day. He did not see them coming until it was too late. The formation stood at attention as Harrigan walked toward the front. His boots crunched against the gravel with the confident rhythm of a man who believed himself untouchable. He carried a clipboard and wore the expression of bored authority that had intimidated soldiers for 15 years. He did not notice the military police flanking the formation until he reached the podium. Yara watched from 30 meters away. Beside her, Ghost stood motionless, his single eye fixed on the man who had killed his friends and escaped justice for 3 years. Delgado stood on her other side, his wounded arm held stiff against his body. Captain Linden stepped forward before Harrigan could speak. "Master Sergeant Harrigan," she said. Her voice carried across the silent formation. "You are being detained pending investigation by Criminal Investigation Command." Harrigan's face went blank. Then confusion. Then the first flicker of fear. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Captain, I do not know what someone told you, but this is completely inappropriate. We can discuss whatever concerns you have in private." The colonel from CID stepped forward. "Master Sergeant Cole Harrigan, you are under investigation for espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and treason against the United States. You will surrender your weapon and accompany these officers immediately." The word treason rippled through the formation like a shockwave. Soldiers exchanged glances. NCOs shifted uncomfortably. The morning that had begun as routine had become something none of them would ever forget. Harrigan's composure cracked. "This is insane. I am a decorated, non-commissioned officer with 15 years of service. You cannot just accuse me of treason in front of my soldiers without evidence." Ghost stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but in the silence it carried like thunder. "We have evidence. Recordings of you selling patrol routes to enemy contacts. Recordings of you discussing the sabotage of Sergeant First Class Okonkwo's equipment." He paused. "And testimony linking you to the deaths of Sergeant First Class Williams and Staff Sergeant Reyes in Kandahar Province 3 years ago." Harrigan's face drained of color. He looked at Ghost as if seeing a dead man walking. He whispered. "You were supposed to be finished. After Kandahar, after your eye, you were supposed to disappear." "I did disappear," Ghost said. "Into logistics. Into the background. Into all the places you stopped looking." He stepped closer. "You thought I forgot about Williams and Reyes. You thought I accepted the official story. You thought wrong." The military police moved forward. Harrigan took a step back, then another. His hand moved toward his sidearm. "Do not," the colonel warned. "There are 200 witnesses here, Master Sergeant. Whatever you are thinking, it ends with you dead or in chains. Choose wisely." Harrigan's hand trembled over his weapon. For a long moment, Yara thought he might actually draw, might force them to shoot him rather than face what was coming. Then his shoulders slumped. His hand fell away from the pistol. The military police closed in and secured his weapon, then his wrists. As they let him past Yara, he stopped. The MPs let him pause for just a moment, perhaps curious what he would say. "Lucky shots," Harrigan said. His voice was hollow, stripped of the confidence that had defined him. "That is all they were. Lucky shots in the dark. You're not a real sniper. You will never be a real sniper." Yara met his eyes. She thought about all the things she could say, all the anger she could unleash, all the vindication she had earned through blood and skill, and the refusal to break. Instead, She simply reached in her pocket and pulled out her father's glove. She held it up so Harrigan could see the worn leather, the faded stitching, the years of use that had shaped it to her hand. "My father taught me to shoot in complete darkness," she said. "He taught me to trust my body when my eyes failed. He taught me that skill is not about what you can see. It is about what you know." She slipped the glove onto her hand. "I knew where every one of those targets was last night. I knew where you would send the enemy to find me. And I knew that when the sun came up, I would still be standing and you would be in chains." She stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "That is not luck, Master Sergeant. That is what happens when you underestimate someone based on what they look like instead of what they can do." The MPs pulled him away. He did not speak again. Captain Linden addressed the formation. "What you witnessed today will remain classified until the investigation is complete. Return to your duties." Dismissed. The soldiers dispersed slowly, many of them casting glances at Yara as they passed. Some looked confused. Others looked impressed. A few nodded with respect they had never shown before. Delgado appeared at her shoulder. "That was incredible," he said, the look on his face when Ghost stepped forward. "I thought he was going to pass out." Yara watched the MPs load Harrigan into a vehicle. "It is not over. There will be trials, investigations, people asking questions about how the evidence was gathered. This could take years." Ghost joined them. "Let it take years. The evidence is solid. The recordings are authenticated. And the drone footage of your shots last night has already been reviewed by 3 separate ballistics experts." He paused. "They are calling it the most impressive display of marksmanship under adverse conditions in the history of the modern army." Yara shook her head. "I just did what I was trained to do." "No," Ghost said. "You did what no one believed was possible. You completed a mission blind. You killed a high-value target without being able to see him. And when the enemy came to finish you, you fought them off alone in complete darkness." He put his hand on her shoulder. "Your father would be proud." The words hit her harder than she expected. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back. "He already knew," she said quietly. "He always knew what I could become. He just did not live long enough to see it." Ghost nodded. "The best teachers never do. That is why they teach. So their students can carry what they learned into places the teacher will never go." They stood together in the morning light, watching the vehicle carrying Harrigan disappear through the gates of FOB Wolverine. Somewhere beyond those gates, justice was waiting. Slow and imperfect, but waiting nonetheless. Captain Linden approached. "Sergeant First Class Okonkwo, when you have been cleared by medical, report to my office." She paused. "We need to discuss your future with this unit." Yara straightened. "Yes, ma'am." Linden allowed herself a small smile. "For what it is worth, I am recommending you for the Silver Star. What you did last night was beyond exceptional." She walked away before Yara could respond. The field hospital smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Yara sat on the edge of a cot while a medic finished stitching the wound on her arm. The gash was deeper than she had realized during the firefight, a 4-inch laceration that would leave a scar she would carry for the rest of her life. She did not mind. Scars meant survival. Scars meant the story continued. Delgado occupied the cot beside her, his shoulder freshly bandaged, his arm immobilized in a sling. He had refused evacuation to the larger hospital at Bagram, insisting he wanted to stay with the unit. The doctors had relented after confirming the wound was clean and healing properly. "How does it feel?" he asked, "knowing it is over?" Yara considered the question. "It does not feel over. Harrigan is gone, but the damage he caused is still out there. The men he got killed are still dead. The intelligence he sold is still in enemy hands." She flexed her fingers as the medic tied off the final stitch. Victory does not erase what happened. It just stops it from happening again. Delgado nodded slowly. "When I was running down that slope," he said, "after you told me to go, I thought I was never going to see you again. I thought you were sacrificing yourself so I could escape." "I was, but you did not die." Yara allowed herself a small smile. "I had unfinished business." The medic finished his work and moved on to another patient. Yara tested her arm, rotating the joint, checking her range of motion. It would be stiff for a few weeks, but functional. She had shot through worse. A knock came at the hospital entrance. Captain Linden stood in the doorway, her face carrying an expression Yara had never seen before. Something between respect and barely contained excitement. "Sergeant First Class Okonkwo," the captain said, "if you're medically cleared, I need you in my office. There are some people who want to speak with you." Yara stood, ignoring the pull of fresh stitches. She followed Linden across the base to the command building, Delgado trailing behind despite not being invited. No one told him to leave. Linden's office was crowded. Ghost stood in the corner, his usual stillness radiating quiet satisfaction. Corporal Vang sat at a communication station, monitoring channels with one ear while following the conversation with the other. And in the center of the room, seated behind Linden's desk, as if he owned it, was a two-star General Yara did not recognize. The general stood when she entered. His uniform bore the insignia of the 18 Airborne Corps. He was older than she expected, with gray at his temples and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of service. "Sergeant First Class Okonkwo," he said, "I am Major General Harrison. I oversee Special Operations Training for Forces Command." Yara came to attention. "Sir." "At ease, Sergeant." The general gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. He smiled slightly and continued. "I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing the drone footage from your mission. I have also read the after-action reports, listened to the radio communications, and spoken with everyone involved in last night's operation." He paused, studying her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of soldiers over the years. "What you did should not be possible," he said. "Engaging and eliminating a high-value target in zero-visibility conditions. Defending a position against a numerically superior force without night vision capability. Making shots that our best simulation models say cannot be made." He shook his head. "And yet here you are, standing in front of me with a Thruff hand throw on your arm and 7 confirmed kills in complete darkness." "I had support," Yara said. "Ghost provided coordinates." Corporal Vang redirected the drone. Specialist Delgado acted as my eyes before my night vision failed completely. The general nodded. "Yes, you had support. But support does not pull the trigger. Support does not calculate ballistics in real time without visual confirmation. Support does not hold a position alone against 8 enemy combatants while waiting for extraction." He stood and walked around the desk to face her directly. "What you did was extraordinary, Sergeant, and I'm not the only one who noticed." He handed her a folder. Inside were orders. Transfer authorization. Assignment to a unit she had never heard of before. "We are forming a new training cadre," the general explained. "Soldiers who can operate in conditions that would render conventional forces combat ineffective. Night fighting. Degraded visibility. Sensory deprivation environments." He met her eyes. "I want you to help design the program, and I want you to teach it." Yara stared at the orders. The words blurred slightly as their meaning sank in. "You want me to train snipers," she said. "I want you to train soldiers to do what you did last night. To fight when they cannot see. To trust their bodies when their eyes fail." He paused. "Captain Linden tells me you learned these techniques from your father." The mention of her father tightened something in her chest. "Yes, sir. He was a competitive shooter. He believed that vision was only one input among many. He was right, and now his methods are going to save lives." The general extended his hand. "What do you say, Sergeant?" Yara thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of doubt and dismissal. The constant battles to prove herself. The night on a ridge in Helmand Province when everything she had learned was tested against impossible odds. She thought about her father, teaching her to shoot in the darkness behind their Memphis home. About his voice echoing across the years. "Eyes live, baby girl. Trust your body." She took the general's hand. "I say yes, sir." The general smiled. "Good. Report to Fort Benning in 30 days. We have a lot of work to do." He left the office with his aides trailing behind. The room felt larger in his absence. Quieter. Yara looked at the orders in her hand as if they might disappear. Delgado was the first to speak. "Did that just happen?" "It happened," Ghost confirmed. He moved from his corner, approaching Yara with something in his hand. The challenge coin from Kandahar. The one he had mentioned carrying for 3 years. He pressed it into her palm. Those men would have wanted you to have this, he said. You finished what they started. You brought down the man who killed them. Yara closed her fingers around the coin. The metal was warm from Ghost's pocket, worn smooth from years of being carried. I will not forget them, she said. Ghost nodded once. I know you will not. That is why I am giving it to you. He walked out without another word. It was the most she had ever heard him say at one time. Captain Linden cleared her throat. There is one more thing, Sergeant, before you leave us for Fort Benning. She handed Yara a satellite phone. Your mother has been trying to reach you for 6 hours. Something about seeing a news report. I think she would like to hear your voice. Yara took the phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed the familiar number. Her mother answered on the first ring. Her mother's voice broke on the second word. Baby, she said. Baby, are you okay? I saw something on the news about an operation in Afghanistan. They did not say your name, but I knew. A mother knows. Yara leaned against the wall of Captain Linden's office, suddenly aware of how tired she was. How much the night had taken from her. Mama. I am safe. They said there was a firefight. They said American soldiers were engaged for hours. Her mother's voice trembled. They said someone did something impossible. Yara closed her eyes. Through the phone, she could hear Memphis, the distant sound of traffic on Union Avenue, the creak of the old house settling, the ghost of her father in every corner of that place. It was me, Mama. I was the one. Silence on the line. Then a sound Yara had not heard since her father's funeral. Her mother crying. Not with grief this time. With something else. Something that sounded like release. He always said you would do something extraordinary, her mother managed. Every time you went outside to practice with him, every time you came back and smelling like gunpowder and grass, he would look at me and say our girl is going to change things. She paused to collect herself. I think he knew. Somehow. He knew he would not be here to see it, but he knew you would make him proud. Yara felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. She did not wipe them away. I wore his glove, she said. Last night, when I could not see anything, when everything was darkness. I put on his glove, and I could feel him with me. Her mother made a sound between a laugh and a sob. That old thing. I wanted to throw it away after he passed. It was falling apart, but you would not let me. It is still holding together. Just like you, baby. Just like you. They talked for another 20 minutes. Her mother shared news from home. Cousins getting married. Neighbors asking about her. The church putting her name on the prayer list every Sunday. Small things. Ordinary things. The fabric of a life that continued even when she was half a world away, fighting in the dark. When she finally hung up, the office was empty. Linden had slipped out at some point, giving her privacy. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden stripes across the floor. Yara looked at the orders in her hand. Fort Benning. Training command. A chance to pass on everything her father had taught her to a new generation of soldiers. She thought about the recruits she would train. Young men and women who would learn to shoot without seeing. Who would learn to trust their bodies when technology failed. Who would carry her father's methods into battles she would never fight. His legacy would continue. Through her. Through them. Through every shot taken in darkness by a soldier who had learned that eyes lie. She folded the orders and tucked them into her pocket beside the challenge coin from Ghost. 1 month later, Yara stood at the front of classroom at Fort Benning. 24 soldiers sat before her, handpicked from units across the Army. The best shooters, the fastest learners, the ones their commanders had identified as having something extra. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She recognized both. She had faced both her entire career. My name is Sergeant First Class Yara Okonkwo, she said. Some of you may have heard stories about what happened in Helmand Province last month. Some of those stories are exaggerated. Most of them are not. She picked up a rifle from the table beside her. Standard issue. Nothing special about it. Over the next 8 weeks, I'm going to teach you to do things that your previous instructors told you were impossible. You're going to learn to shoot without seeing your target. You're going to learn to fight in complete darkness. You're going to learn to trust your bodies when every piece of technology fails. She chambered around. Some of you will not make it. The techniques I teach require a level of focus and discipline that not everyone possesses. That is not a failure. That is just reality. But those of you who do, make it will become something new. Something the enemy has never faced before. She walked to the window and pulled the blackout curtains closed. The room plunged into darkness. Lesson 1, she said. Close your eyes. The ceremony took place 3 weeks into the training cycle. Yara stood at attention on a parade field at Fort Benning while a colonel read the citation aloud. The Silver Star, for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The words described what she had done that night on the ridge. The equipment failure, the shots in darkness, the defense of her position against overwhelming odds. They were accurate words, official words. They captured the facts without quite capturing the truth. The truth was simpler. She had refused to quit. She had trusted what her father taught her, and she had survived. The colonel pinned the medal to her chest. In the crowd, she saw Delgado, his arm finally free of the sling. She saw Ghost, standing apart from the others, watching with his single eye. She saw her mother, flown in as a surprise, crying openly and not caring who saw. And beside her mother, in a frame her mother held against her chest, she saw her father. The photograph was old, faded. It showed him on the farm in Memphis, a rifle in his hands, a young Yara standing beside him learning to shoot. She had been 6 years old in that picture. She had not known then what he was preparing her for. She had not known that every lesson in the darkness behind their house was training for a night that would not come for almost 30 years. But he had known. Somehow, he had always known. After the ceremony, her mother embraced her for a long time without speaking. When she finally pulled back, she pressed something into Yara's hand. I found this in his desk, her mother said. After he passed, I think he meant for you to have it. It was a letter, handwritten, her father's cramped script covering both sides of the page. Yara read it slowly. The words blurred through her tears. Baby girl, the letter began. If you're reading this, I am gone and you're still fighting. I want you to know that I see what you are becoming. I see the warrior inside you. I see the strength you do not yet know you have. Trust your body. Trust your training. Trust yourself. The darkness is not your enemy. It is where you will find your greatest victories. I love you. I will always love you. And I will always be with you, even when you cannot see me. Yara folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket beside the challenge coin and the orders that had brought her here. That night, she went to the range alone. She put on her father's glove. She aimed at a target she could not see in the darkness. She fired, dead center. She smiled, whispered thank you, and walked toward the lights of the base, toward her students, toward everything she had yet to teach them. If this story moved you, drop a comment and share what resonated most. Maybe you have known someone whose skills were doubted until the moment those skills were needed most. Or maybe you have been the one who had to prove yourself when everyone expected you to fail. Either way, we would love to hear your story.